Hi there, this is David Miller, and I'm here with number 5 in a series of mini lectures on Richard Wright's novel Native Son. Today we look to Book 3, and we're going to talk about murder versus art. So we were talking last time about Bigger's desire to be recognized by the world. In that scene on the streetcar, the same desire for recognition makes Bigger want to shout out what he has done to all the white faces of the passengers. He wanted the keen thrill of startling them, but felt that the cost was too great. He wished that he had the power to say what he had done without fear of being arrested. He wished that he could be an idea in their minds, that his black face and the image of his smothering Mary and cutting off her head and burning her could hover before their eyes as a terrible picture of reality which they could see and feel and yet not destroy. Here's where we find the secret link between Richard Wright and his protagonist. The power Bigger wishes for, the power to broadcast his crime without fear and become an idea in the minds of white people everywhere, that is the power of the writer's imagination. Bigger does indeed hover before their eyes, our eyes, as a terrible picture of reality, which we can see and feel and yet not destroy. He achieves this recognition not in the story, but as the story, in us. The artist knows his character so well because they've lived the same history, known the same fear and anger. Wright tells us that Bigger has actually murdered many times in his heart, and I believe he knows this from his own experience. Doesn't diminish the writer to acknowledge this. Could Shakespeare have created characters like Iago or Macbeth so unforgettably if he hadn't been able to find a bit of their supreme evil lurking in his own heart? Like Walt Whitman, who wrote, "I contain multitudes." These artists look inside themselves and into those around them, and they have the integrity to acknowledge what's really there. That's why one answer to the question, what is the opposite of repression, might be art. He had killed twice, Wright tells us, but in a true sense it was not the first time he had ever killed. He had killed many times before, but only during the last 2 days had this impulse assumed the form of actual killing. Blind anger had come often, and he had either gone behind his curtain or wall, or had quarreled and fought, and yet, whether in running away or in fighting, he had felt the need of the clean satisfaction of facing this thing in all its fullness. The artist has to achieve this within himself before he can offer it to his readers in Native Son. The clean satisfaction of facing things in their fullness, that is the opposite of repression, and it is the source of Wright's power as a creative artist. This means that just as the author has a secret link to his character, so the act of creation is secretly akin to the act of murder. In many ways, they are opposites, creation as opposed to destruction, and yet each springs from the same deep impulse, which may, as Wright says, assume the form of actual killing, as it does for Bigger, or may take shape as a terrible picture of reality, the indestructible picture Wright gives us in Native Son. When Bigger thinks of what he has done as a supreme and meaningful act, his words apply equally well to the act of committing murder and to the act of writing it. This hidden kinship between the two acts may explain the sense of exhilaration Bigger feels the next morning. He had murdered and had created a new life for himself, says Wright, almost as if the crime were a work of art or a spiritual conversion. And again later, he had committed murder twice and had created a new world for himself. This sense of having created himself anew explains why Bigger decides that, in a certain sense, the girl's death had not been accidental. He wants to own the deed, to take responsibility for it because, like a work of art, it has expressed his inner truth. The hidden meaning of his life, a meaning which others did not see and which he had always tried to hide, had spilled out, and so he feels like a man reborn, like a man risen up well from a long illness. Strange as it may seem, this language of rebirth also suggests a religious aspect to Bigger's crime. Religion has been a theme of the novel from the start, with Bigger's mother singing Negro spirituals in the first scene and Bigger telling her, when she tries to warn him about his life, "Stop prophesying about me." There is the image of sex as a cleansing baptismal fountain. In Bigger's nightmare, it's a church bell that seems to follow him through the streets. Later, in an abandoned building, he awakens to the sound of a congregation singing in a nearby church. At the very end of Book 2, as Bigger lies in the snow and the crowd screams for his blood, Wright tells us 2 men stretched his arms out as though about to crucify him. No one will confuse Bigger Thomas with the Prince of Peace, but here Wright does identify him with the Christian beloved Son. Now, does the image shock you? What does it mean? I think it indicates that Bigger is a sacrificial victim, a scapegoat, as Jesus was. In the cold pre-dawn, before his last day of freedom in the world, Bigger wonders, why should not this cold white world rise up as a beautiful dream in which it would be easy to tell what to do and what not to do? If only someone had gone before and lived or suffered or died, made it so that it could be understood. It was too stark, not redeemed, not made real with the reality that was the warm blood of life. Now, of course, for the congregation singing in the church, there is someone who has gone before, who lived, suffered, and died so that experience in this world could be understood and redeemed with the warm blood of life. But for Bigger and Richard Wright, Christianity no longer has that power to redeem a brutal existence. For them, the deep spiritual roots of the African American community in this country seem too submissive. Would it not have been better for him, Wright asks, had he lived in that world the music sang of? But the answer is no. The comfort of such belief is something Bigger could never have unless he laid his head upon a pillow of humility and gave up his hope of living in the world. And he would never do that. For Richard Wright, as I said earlier about Carlyle and Dickens, the ancient story of sacrifice needs to be reimagined. In Richard Wright's version, Bigger himself becomes the sacrificial figure he wishes for, the one whose suffering and death make life so that it could be understood. In this particular sense, all 3 of the deaths in Nydia, Mary's, Bessie's, and Bigger's, turn out to be sacrificial. These victims die so that the repressed meaning of their lives will spill out with the reality that was the warm blood of life. In a very real sense, it is Richard Wright who spills their blood. He does so to make redemption possible. That is the sacrament he offers us in this novel, killings not acted out but imagined and narrated in awful detail. He kills his characters in an act of faith, not religious faith, but faith in the power of art to redeem a brutalized existence by making sense of it. Faith in the redemptive value of facing reality in all its fullness and creating a terrible image of it which nothing can destroy. Bigger's rebirth doesn't last very long. Neither sex nor murder sets him free at last. But the novel itself still struggles toward redemption, toward a new life and a new world that will rise up as a beautiful dream. It offers Bigger, along with Mary and Bessie, as victims who die to reveal this dream. They must die, Wright suggests, because the beautiful dream cannot rise up until we have come to terms with the nightmare of Bigger's life.